Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining me today for another video. And this is a continuation on my series of eating disorders, diet and wellness culture, and food addiction. And specifically, today's topic is going to be closing up food addiction, wrapping it up in a bow, and kind of having you open this new knowledge as a present to see where it fits for you and what your belief systems are. So let's get started. So if I say food, is it to you guilty or innocent, good or bad? Is it addictive? What do you think? Here's another question for you. Which of the following aspects make food something that we personify, argue about, and or feel guilty or superior about? Is it the food itself? Is it our eating behavior? Is it our misguided desires for or not for certain foods? Is it the latest diet trend or food tribe that moralizes, demonizes, or exalts certain food categories? Is it our society's diet and wellness culture context? Is it weight and bias stigma? Or is it healthism, which is a belief that being healthy and attractive is a moral objective within a culture, and that the current accepted societal body type is a virtue? Which do apply? I'm sure that all will have different answers and different selections based on personal experience and personal beliefs. It's a sticky topic, right? See what I did there? So we've come to a bit of a turning point in my series on eating disorders. I want to finish off what I started in the other videos. And if you missed those, make sure that you go to the video description and click on the link, because that will have references and resources and the preceding video links in that description. Okay? So no worries, you can catch up, or I'm actually going to summarize. That might be enough for you in this video. So let's get started and finish off on food addiction. So here's the big question. Can or should we diagnose food as an addiction? Here's the basic summary. In short, food addiction is often referred to and accepted in wellness and health circles, but it's technically not been officially classified as such. So as I noted in the previous video, identifying food as an addiction has three major issues that have to be resolved before it can be a true diagnosis. These include distinguishing food addiction between other eating disorders or behavior that's similar. For example, food addiction might look very similar to binge eating disorder. Now, this confusion and misdiagnosis could cause harm if one treats an eating disordered behavior as an addiction and promotes restriction that can actually make the eating disorder worse. The second issue is that the definition itself, the criteria, and the treatments are not agreed upon by experts. Specifically, the quantification scales that they're using in research haven't actually been validated for food addiction. They've been extrapolated from substance abuse disorders and not specifically for validating what a food addiction is, because it's hard to test validity of a scale when you don't even have a universally accepted criteria or measurement or characteristics of what the actual thing is that you're measuring. The third issue is conflicting evidence between mechanisms, theories, and associations in studies and actual human trial results. So many say sugar is addictive, but it doesn't hold up in human clinical trials. What does hold up is that hangry, sweet-deprived rodents will binge on sugar when they're finally allowed access. And when human beings and rats are given free access to sugar, they eat it moderately and stop. So it's the restriction itself that is actually promoting some of this, quote, food addictive behavior with sugar. Okay, so those are the first three issues. Now, I want to go over the next three. And first, I'll give you an overview, and then we'll go into the details. Okay, so the fourth reason is there's no universal food that creates an addictive response in people. So unlike all forms of alcohol, in which an alcoholic can get drunk on anything that he can find, or she. This isn't the case for someone addicted to food. With disordered eating, this is a fifth reason, it often coexists with mental health disorders. So this is a very slippery slope, because we could actually be focusing on a symptom of a mental health issue rather than and if we focus on the food addiction, it's a minor issue, and we're never going to actually treat the underlying problem, and really kind of could cause harm. The sixth issue is labeling something that our body needs to function as an addictive. That should not be taken lightly, because if you're cutting out any food, the body needs external interventions to function properly in order to handle that restriction. So if it's all carbs, if it's all sugars, if it's vegan, we have to be careful. Now, people may be doing this for other reasons rather than quote unquote food addiction, but nobody will argue that if we take an extreme measure with foods, there's corrective measures from the outside that need to occur. That isn't necessarily the case for substance use disorder or alcohol, right? When someone stops drinking, we don't try to replace several forms of the beer or the wine or the liquor, right? They stop the drinking and then their bodies go back into balance. Okay, so those are the 6 main issues with diagnosing food as an addiction. So let's dive in a little bit more into the reasons. And again, it's distinguishing between food addiction and other eating disorders, that the definition itself, criteria, and treatments aren't agreed upon by experts, conflicting evidence between mechanisms, theories, and actual human trials. There's no universal food that creates an addiction. Disordered eating often coexists with mental health disorders, and labeling something that our body needs to function as an addiction has many implications, and it should not be taken lightly. Okay, so here's reason 4. There's no universal food that causes addiction. So someone's downfall could be a cookie, another could be a cheese curl. So remember, when someone's addicted to alcohol, the form doesn't matter, right? The person's trying to get that response from the alcohol. And we can't really label sugar as addictive, not only for the reasons I mentioned in that it doesn't hold up in human trials, but some can eat one form with a specific food that's quote addictive with impunity and not another. Okay, so somebody can eat one form of baked goods fine and another form maybe not so good. Cakes versus muffins, you get the drift. So another issue is it's not actually the food that might be the problem, right? Because alcohol causes harm in the body, but people can actually drink it moderately and be okay. They have no negative effects. Some would argue maybe even just a little because of the links to cancer, especially in women for hormones. But overall, their functioning is not impaired long-term if they do it moderately or lightly. They're not alcoholics, right? That's the bottom line. Mentally, they're not alcoholics. So the problem isn't the alcohol itself, right? It's this interaction, this multifactorial thing. So it's not the food, it's not the alcohol in this argument. So all of these different interacting factors and aspects differentiate between which foods are off bounds or tempting to one person versus another. So let me go through some of these. Personal preference, right? Mouth feel, texture, hyperpalatability is actually a thing. It might not make food quote unquote addictive, but it is there. One's past experience with that food and their association. Biochemical individuality. Can that person break down certain aspects of the food? And if not, does it cause a reaction in their body? Genetics, ethnicity, their microbiome. People can respond to sugar differently based on the bugs in their belly. And socioeconomic and cultural factors that contribute to eating behavior. So it's not just one thing that determines what a person prefers, what a person will eat, and what's their favorite food. So there was a 2018 review article called Food Addiction, a Valid Concept, and it explored this food addiction from both angles and kind of looked at some of the missing pieces as far as actually meeting that criteria. And they did say that Although refined and excessively palatable combinations of sugars and fats in Western diets increase addiction liability, there's no addiction substance that's been identified. And there's the issue of questioning relating food addiction to the overall schema of problematic eating, right? Do we want to include quote unquote addiction to food as a mental health disorder? Which leads us to number 5, which is it the chicken or the egg kind of phenomenon? Okay, is food addiction more of a symptom than a disorder? So what's considered a food addiction has a high degree of comorbidity with other mental health issues. So is it addictive or is it a symptom of another mental health issue? So some authors even argue that the diagnosis of 2 things occurring at once is a rule, not even an exception. So here's my biggest concern with this. If we focus on the behavior and preach abstinence model for food, saying food is bad, you shouldn't do this, you shouldn't do that, you shouldn't eat that, we could set up people for shame and blaming themselves when the underlying issue is not the food, but the mental health issue that's the biggest problem. And we need to look at that and treat that. And we also could be contributing to more eating disorders, orthorexic practices, which is this obsession with healthy eating, and or binge eating disorders if we're promoting restriction. Because we know specifically when you're treating an eating disorder, when you promote restriction, what ends up happening is a cycle and it gets worse. So I covered this a bit in the other video if you want to check that out about the difference between binge eating disorder, eating disorders, and food addictions, and why that line has to be drawn if we're going to diagnose food addiction. But that's a basic concept, okay? So we have gone through no food has been classified universally as addictive. We've gone through, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it a symptom rather than an actual diagnosis? And then we have to look at the caveats and the seriousness of labeling food as an addiction, because we have to consider, is food addiction or withdrawal as dangerous or crack or alcohol use or withdrawal? Okay, it's a very serious question. According to Amen clinics, addiction, are also known as substance use disorder, involves the harmful use of illicit drugs, prescription medications, or alcohol. And addiction occurs when habitual use of a substance or multiple substances changes the way the brain experiences pleasure, right? So reality is no longer, and everything is about that substance, right? So there are biological, there are psychological, there are social, there are spiritual symptoms that emerge when one is addicted. And by spiritual, I mean beliefs, core values, purpose, and morals, not necessarily religion. And these can lead to dire consequences in every area of one's life because that is overridden by the substance. It is a complex topic and it merges brain health with mental health when we're talking about an addiction. So if one is truly addicted to food or a substance where it's negatively affecting one's life, as does an illicit drug or substance of abuse or alcohol, we have to take this matter very tenderly. So what we would be finding in society is that food addicts were unable to function. They were partaking in illicit and harmful behaviors such as violence, drinking while under the influence of McDonald's, and more, right? That's kind of tongue in cheek. But there are arguers and health influencers who say it's just as dangerous because people are wasting their money on food and they're damaging their health and their loved ones, right? That there is a moral objective to being healthy and that people who are eating specific foods are killing themselves and they need to be treated. Okay. Is that a true addiction or is that a cultural morality and healthism being reflected and disguised as something that someone's doing makes them uncomfortable, therefore it's wrong and needs to be addressed and stopped? So these are very gray issues for me. I honestly think, again, if we're going to label food as an addiction and it does eventually meet all the criteria, we have to be very, very careful. And I think right now, we could potentially be damaging people with this without having the proper treatment and making sure that we are ruling out literal eating disorders or underlying mental health issues or just stress and coping skills that's underlying something else like an anxiety disorder or something else. So here's the bottom line. Food addiction is not yet have met the criteria that's universally accepted. It is being talked about as it has, right? And there'll be various articles. I have several sources in my accompanying article that basically just acknowledge food is an addiction. Again, in the recent reviews that I've read, this isn't necessarily the case in the published reviews. There's points to, and there's mechanisms, and there's theories, and there's reward pathways in the brain that light up. But again, the translation into human trials, we need more evidence, okay? We have to look at extreme eating patterns that this can promote if we deem food as good or evil and what people can and cannot eat, and inject that onto society as an addiction. So here's the thing. 2 criteria need to be met for an eating disorder: distress and impaired function. Okay, if you or someone you know feels anxiety around food or eating and starts to miss out on life, cut out on events and isolate yourself from social events because you are not wanting to eat at restaurants with friends because you feel uncomfortable because you cannot eat that food, it is an extreme. It is not healthy. And this is a cognitive dissonance in the health and wellness communities that I'm seeing, because we are causing impaired function and distress, treating the very thing we're aiming to remediate. Okay, so people with eating disorders may actually be turning to some, and I can say this in the past because I've done this, where I've said people were addicted and restricted them, and this is why I'm here now, issuing a warning and plea for people to be a little open-minded about this and make sure that if they're treating someone with cravings or if they're using interventions for brain health, they're doing it under this knowledge of helping someone with coping skills and brain health, and not necessarily because they're an addict and food is bad. Okay, they're just trying to nourish the brain and body. So there's a whole different way of looking at things. And we need to get to the root cause, okay? So I personally have experience working with clients. They felt they were addicted to certain foods, and we have worked, and it isn't short term, okay? This is a long term with all of the messages we're getting from society and diet culture. We have worked with these messages. We've helped these people heal their relationship with nutrition, their body, and balancing their brain health and emotional, spiritual, and physical health. And they were able to eat foods that they thought they were addicted to with moderation, enjoyment, and pleasure. Some even experienced that they didn't even like the food when they went back to it and had permission to eat it. It was just this forbidden treasure, right? So that once they could have it, all heck broke loose. But when they were allowed to keep it in their house and eat it whenever they wanted, the magic went away, right? It's kind of like those rodents with the sugar versus when the sugar, they were restricted from it, they binged. But when they weren't, they just ate it whenever they wanted. So there's this fear around food that creates an anxiety for some people. So that's my experience clinically. And I used to think I was a sugar addict, and I can say I don't have that issue anymore. So this is my experience. This is what I'm sharing with you. I don't proclaim to be the expert. I'm just showing you some of the issues with what's in the literature as far as just blindly accepting that food is addictive. And I wanted to present it to you because I think there's some dangers. And I am a big, 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 big advocate for mental health and brain health. And all I want is people to nurture themselves and find brain balance and health and happiness in their lives. And I want to support them doing that. So that is my goal. You can completely disagree with me. I would love to hear from you regarding if you do disagree with me, if you agree with me, what you think. I think we should start a conversation. And I'd also love for you to check out some of the resources that are on my website that promote mind-body balance using essential oils, but I also have other strategies as well as courses that you can take that are for essential oils, for mind-body hormonal health, as well as for consumers and practitioners. Okay, so check those out, and thank you for listening. Thank you for taking the time to be open to this and expand your mind, because it's hard to look into something that isn't the popular opinion right now. And it takes a lot of courage and it takes a lot of curiosity. And I honor you for that. And I thank you for all that you're doing. Have a great either day or night. And I will be back soon. Hope you join me then. Goodbye.